need you here. This lonely feeling, it cuts me deep because I need you here. Darling.
What's good, YouTube? We're at another Sunday conversation, and today we're having a conversation around Linux, tech careers, DevOps, and women in tech. But not just women in tech, but specifically women in tech. Now, my channel has been around since 2018. And for the last few years, Tam here has been a integral part of providing information and helping people during these live streams. And she's doing that out of the kindness of her heart because she has her own platform, her own community. And so the first thing I want to say is thank you, Tam, for all that you've done to help others on this journey and on this channel.
You're welcome. I appreciate you for inviting me over, letting me drop in your comments and not blocking me.
Nah, never about that. Never about that. So Tam, this conversation is going to be a dynamic conversation because Tam is dynamic. Women in Linux, she's done so much, not just for women, but also for men as well, to raise awareness around Linux and the opportunities that are in tech. So let me quit talking and introduce Tam. What's good, Tam?
What's going on? How you doing? How's everybody doing out there? Glad to be here. Uh, hey, like I say, I'm open for the conversation. I invite whatever it is that you want to talk about. I mean, let's get it. I mean, there's so much to talk about.
Yeah. I had Reggie Davis on a few months ago, and
Right.
he has so much admiration and love for you on helping him in his journey. What got you started in tech? Let's start there.
Actually, my background is similar to yours in a sense. I actually started with Cisco networking. And my lab partner was uh, uh, on the command line, and he's like, "Oh, this command line is just like Linux." I was like, "Man, so if I learn Linux, I'm gonna learn that Cisco better." Had no clue, just total two different worlds. Had no idea. Bought a computer from him for like, I think he started off at $75, and I talked him down $3, and it was SUSE Linux on it, and I tried to make it look like Windows. So this is way before there was no YouTube when I got started, right? There was no YouTube. It was just forums and the graybeards. And you hopped on the IRC and you went for it. So I started going to the bookstore, buying Linux off the shelf. Just back when you could buy Linux off the shelf, you could buy Red Hat off the shelf. Bought Redhead off the shelf, bought some books, started playing with the forums and trying to do everything they said do in the forums to get something to work. Setting up wireless on my Linux box and so forth. And then I started taking notes, screenshots, taking notes, printing out stuff, running up my laser jet, printing, knocking down trees. And I asked myself one day, I was like, can I get a job doing this? And so I just looked online. Back then, dice.com was hot. You were using Netscape. It wasn't no Chrome. You had Internet Exploder, as we used to call it. And I just went for it, and I was like, "Oh, you can get a job." So then I looked at the job descriptions and looked at what they wanted out of those job descriptions, and then start trying to do every bullet point that they had on those job descriptions. And then I started interviewing, and every interview that I went on, I would write down the questions. And then once I wrote down the questions, I would go back and try to solve those questions, make sure I understood what I was doing, what I was saying. And so when I got done with a lot of my interviews, I had amassed like 2,000 questions. And so I could go back and say, okay, you do X, Y, and Z. Here's step one, step two, step three. And I had those memorized to the point where, okay, I could tell you how to move on the command line, what is in that directory, how you do it, where you would change it. Here's the other things you could change. So the ideas and the thoughts and how to solve the problems became repetitive. And after you do so many interviews, the questions start to come the same as they do now. Everybody's trying to solve the same problem. So some of the questions are repetitive and some of the problems are repetitive, but there may be a new tool that you use. So for me, it's foundational knowledge. I can learn AWS cloud, I can learn Azure cloud, I can learn GCP cloud, but the fundamentals of what makes up a cloud and how to do something is there's still a core and baseline of that. It may be a tweak in with how you do it, but the baseline is still there. So that's how I got started.
I think it's important to mention that the core, the baseline, and the foundation of learning Linux and networking specifically. Now, the question I want to ask is, what year was this when you got started with Linux, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, it's 2000.
Okay, okay. So now this is when I started in tech. For you to be a black woman and to be focused on Linux at that time, because Windows was entering into Active Directory at this
Mm,
time. It was leaving NT behind, and it was like this huge shift for system administrators to that know Active Directory and know Windows. How
right.
did you have the knowledge and the awareness to get started? Because at that time, what was it, Unix? How'd you get started with that?
So let's even put it in a bigger scale. At the time, well, let's back up. First, I was living in Hawaii, is where I got started doing Linux at, and Cisco, and then I moved to Seattle. And then when I got to Seattle, um, it's Microsoft land. So you can only imagine being in a Linux world trying to learn Linux in a Microsoft world. Fortunately, there were still and it's so funny because I go back and look over it. Two things. At the time, uh, Verizon and Amazon was interviewing for Linux positions, and it was a big secret on like what Amazon was doing. And so lo and behold, that's when the S3 came out, right? Around, when I was in Seattle. And that was around about 2005, 2006. But what's so funny is I was interviewing for both of those positions and I had no clue like what they were about to do, where things were about to go in that. And then I interviewed at Microsoft, which was 7 interviews. Each interview was maybe 2 people, and the last interview was a 5 panel interview where you had to sit in front of 5 people and interview. And they had a project. Microsoft had a project called Port 25. And that Port 25 was to start looking at what Linux does and how they could improve the kernel in Linux and how they could take really open source itself and thrive off on it. So the fact that we're now seeing Linux in the kernel now, it all actually started back then with their Port 25. And it was a well-known fact that Microsoft used to run their web servers off of Apache, and they were Linux based servers. So that was always an inside joke with everybody. So what we see now with Linux and Windows coming together and the convergence of really of technology is what we're seeing. Is it's just something you saw a long time ago. So
So you mean to tell me that Microsoft was not running their web servers off of IIS?
no, they were running off for Linux. And this is old. This is old. Like this is probably, I don't know, probably 2001, 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. That was an old story. It was a post you could probably go. online and find people talking about it down in some older was it used to be called SourceForge?
Ah, yeah,
SourceForge
source
dot
for it.
you remember
Yeah,
SourceForge?
yeah,
People like this is pre-Reddit. This is pre-Reddit. Yeah, SourceForge was the Reddit,
right.
of that time.
Yeah, I remember Source Forge, Ask Jeeves. Um,
Mhm.
there was another one too. So I think Yahoo used to have a lot of questions as
Yep,
well.
Yahoo, Ask Jeeves, SourceForge, and then just the various forums for Linux would be like just like right now I think it's Linux.com, but it used to be just it was we think it called just Linux or Newbies for Linux was one of the big ones, and I mean we've had an evolution of Linux websites, but never really nothing as much as we had as much information as we have now.
Right, right, right. Okay, so the question I have is, back then, there weren't a lot of resources to learn any technology. Really, you only really had like the manuals that were created from the vendors, and then maybe you may get like a book or a magazine or something to find some articles. But like the content that were online, it was hard to come by. So the
Mhm.
question that I want to ask here is, for someone that's looking to get started with Linux right now, how would you recommend them go about that?
Oh man, there's so many different ways now.
And maybe before we even ask this question, let's get more specific. What are the pieces? Because Linux is a broad term, right?
Mm.
So, what are the pieces and the fundamental knowledge of Linux? Like, where do you start when learning Linux?
So let's give some different routes here. If I
Okay,
was in college and I'm in school, you're probably gonna get maybe a week or two of Linux. I don't know. I've been out of college for a minute, but usually the classes that I've seen is usually like a week or two. You'll learn how to install a driver. You may learn some assembly, but what you really should be taking out of this, and this is just across the board, you should understand what the kernel is, and you should understand what operating systems are and how to manipulate those operating systems such as CPU, memory, processes, and so forth. And then the other part of that is you also need to understand, well, there's a couple of things. Understand networking as well too. And this is just like a general baseline fundamentals, right? Understand networking, understand subnetting, understand DNS, understand how uh, a DHCP server works, understand how DNS works, A name, C name, PTRs, and then the final thing too is I'll add this in because a lot of some people come out of boot camps and don't understand this, and some people come out of college and don't understand this. Understanding algorithms and data structures. Like those are just core to me, core things because when you start getting into, let's say, I'm writing a bash script and I want to use a hash table. I won't write I want to write a hash table in bash because it takes a lot of time to do that. I may hop over to Python or something else. But then understanding how to do a batch process, understanding how to release a particular process, understanding how a process works, a zombie process, a system process, who owns it, what particular person is hacking this machine or running a process on the machine and is running rate. Those are to me are core things that you're gonna end up taking with you throughout. And when I say that, I'm talking from a perspective of troubleshooting, right? Understanding how to troubleshoot that. Like those are fundamentals to me.
you really caught me off guard when you said data structures and algorithms.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone reference that when it comes to learning Linux. What is the importance of learning data structures and algorithms as a foundational level of knowledge in Linux?
I call it more of on the advanced side. So for me, I look at verticals with Linux. I look at Linux as okay, inside of Linux, I can learn security, I can learn networking, I can learn how to write a script, But if I want to start getting into what I call, and this gets probably off the topic, but DevSecOps and SRE, when we start talking about those jobs, then some fundamentals of data structures and algorithms comes up as part of your fundamentals as you continue to go on. So if you can get that before you start your SRE work, you're ahead of the game, right? You understand stuff a little better. You understand how, and maybe how an application works, or something in the queue, or something on the stack, or oh, this person has a struct, and that struct is causing this. And if you start really peeling back the onion and the layers here, uh, now we start to get into how you may compile some source code, and it's a problem in the struct, and you may need to contact the developer, or you want to debug some code. So that's where I'm getting at with that. It's not necessarily like, oh, day one, if I learn Linux and I don't learn algorithms, I can't get a job. That's
Right.
not what I'm saying. What I'm simply saying is, have more weapons or more tools in your toolbox, so that way when you go to apply for a job, you're multifaceted. You can call your own shots and do what you want to do.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to pause here for 1 second. I want to do some shout outs to the chat, everyone that's tuning in. Thank you for joining us. We are here with Tameika Reed. She's the founder of Women in Linux. She's what I like to call a wealth of knowledge around not just Linux, but DevOps, like she mentioned, DevSecOps, system administration, the cloud, Terraform. We're going to talk about all of these different pieces. And yeah, but I want to do some quick shout outs for everybody that's joining us. One thing I like to know is where you all are repping, where are you watching this from. So if you could put your area code in the chat. If you're not in the US, put your country in the chat so I can do some quick shout outs to see where everybody's representing. Shout out to the moderators. I see you, Gifted Lane, Kev, IT Tech Support, my cousin Dale, good looking out. My guy, Keep It Techie. Shout out to Keep It Techie. Make sure y'all show the moderators some love because they definitely hold it down. We got London in the building. 404, Amber, good to see you. Boston, 615. My bad, go ahead, Tameika.
I said 404 stand up.
404, stand up.
Yeah, I'm originally from Atlanta, so
ATL, shawty.
what up, folks?
Hey, you about to have me A-Town stomping over here.
What it is, what it do, what it ain't.
869 216, Cleveland in the building. 704, North Carolina. 423, Tennessee. Chat Town, 813-313-469. We got Montreal, Canada. Philly in the building, 813-514. Decatur, DMV. Hey, appreciate everybody dropping the information in the chat. Now, getting back to it, Tam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we talked about some foundational knowledge in Linux. Now, when it comes to getting a job with Linux skills, what jobs are out there?
So I look at Linux, or I should say system administration, as the new word for the new term should be DevOps or DevSecOps. Here's why I say that. Is because when you start looking at how to, build out your your cloud, or how to build out your infrastructure, I should say, let's not say cloud, let's say your infrastructure. you- at the bottom and at the core of all that is 9 times out of 10 some Linux box with some type of configuration on it, whether you use a Kickstart or you use Ansible, Puppet, Chef, Salt, whatever you choose as your configuration management. And then on top of that is some security, and then the application that you put on that. So for me, I look at the sysadmin as the DevSecOps or DevOps as the new sysadmin. And so now when you start talking about, oh, back in the day it was CVS and SVN. Now we have GitHub and GitLab. Um, you can go on Travis CI, anything of that nature. Now you got some runners that kicks off a pipeline and does some declarative work that you have defined for you. same way that you did with a kickstart. To me, it all looks the same to me. What ends up happening now is we have unit testing, we have security that we're putting into that pipeline. We have not just testing, but performance testing that we're putting into that pipeline. So there's a couple of things that go on that we didn't do, that we didn't incorporate. And then two, we're bringing people together from developers and operations and security. And really the person that's the DevSecOps person is that operations security developer person per se, because you may write a bash script, you may write a Python script, you may write something in Go. Uh, Now they're putting Rust into the kernel, so you have that now. Security with Stigs, or if you want to talk about securing with ACAS or something of that nature. And then now testing and unit testing and security testing and application testing, right? So to me, there's been a mesh, but in order to go from that being that sysadmin person to that DevSecOps person, you got to add more tools, because that's just what it is, and that's what Terraform or Ansible or whatever you're using, Cloud Formation, ARM templates, and so forth.
You kind of answered my question, but I want to make sure we get this question answered specifically, because one of the things I heard you say is that the system administrator position has evolved.
Hmm.
I've never heard anybody really talk about the system administration or system administrator position like going away. But it's clear that it's not what it used to be. Is that
Right.
position still around, or has that
Yep.
moved on to transition to be
Oh,
DevOps?
oh no, that position is still around. Like, um, and I laugh at it because the cloud is some bare metal machines sitting in a rack in some data center somewhere or underwater. Yeah, that's some underwater data centers.
Right.
But right, but it is still an operating system that's installed on it. Like, I don't care how we try to slice this. If you look at Amazon and you look at Google Cloud and you look at Azure Cloud, underneath that is virtualization, and that's with KVM. And anybody knows that KVM is what, type 1, type 2, so it's type 2, so it needs some OS underneath that, whether you scale it down and pull things out of the kernel, out of the operating system to scale it down to make it faster. But underneath that is still some virtualization, right? And then you still have bare metal. People still have bare metal machines that are not that for data that they're not going to have access to in the cloud. NASA would be one of those, that we're just never going to put everything into the cloud. They're going to hold that data in some warehouse somewhere, for security purposes, whatever that may be, meeting compliance and codes and laws. So that job is still there. So that's why it's kind of funny, when you look at some of the jobs. Some jobs do require that you understand how to set up bare metal systems. Hey, I have 1,000 machines that I need to set up that are bare metal. How are you going to deploy those machines? How are you going to set those machines up? Do you understand networking, DHCP, kickstarts, jump starts, putting it on a thumb drive and booting it up, and then connecting those machines up to whatever we need to connect it up on our network, securing those machines and so forth. That's still a job. There's still somebody that does that.
I love that. I love that. So the system administrator position is still around, and people can still search for that job title and apply for that position.
Yep. So underneath that would be, how to set up an NFS server, or how to set up iSCSI, how to set up DNS or caching DNS, um, how to secure stuff with ACLs, how do you take a Linux box and join an Active Directory domain, how to use triple SD, how to use LDAP or Open LDAP. Those things are still there. If you're on-prem, right? It may not be so much as you would use that in the cloud, but on-prem, yes.
Okay. Now, here's my next question when it comes to Linux. Is it important to learn, and how important? Let me rephrase it. Is Linux a technology that people need to learn?
I say yes. And the reason why I say yes is because underneath most of your boxes, even when you deploy an EC2 instance in AWS, just a regular Linux EC2 instance, it's 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 Linux, and it's actually I guess a version of Yum, because you still use Yum to update it. You can deploy, of course, Debian or Ubuntu, whatever your choice is, but you just go with the default, right? Without changing anything. It's just a Red Hat or slimmed down version of Red Hat, if you want to call it that. It's their OS, but it still uses Yum as its package manager. Um, the reason why I say Linux is a foundational skill is because it's so much that it encompasses. So if I want to understand directory structures, how to secure a box, how to how to look at log files, or how to read log files, or what's going on. Those are foundational, I guess, concepts that are taught in Linux. Troubleshooting, those are just foundational things. Then once you get past the foundational things, to me, you add on to those other concepts, such as, okay, well, I need 5 boxes and they all need to look the same. What would be my best option to make those 5 boxes look the same? Now you're starting adding on to your toolbox from that. But I think Linux gives you foundational knowledge. And also, Linux is everywhere, right? It's in cars, it's in satellites. We launched 32,000 satellites, and they were all Linux based. I just talked about this yesterday. We're working on Wi-Fi on the moon. Do you think that that's going to be a Windows embedded system? No, it's probably going to be a Linux embedded system. When we're talking about, we want to launch people from the moon to Mars, what does that look like? You know, we Linux is everywhere, and it's one of those things that's just like, you either you got it or you don't. When you're looking at when you're looking at skill sets, a lot of people enforce, like, you need to be an expert at Linux. You need to, and what does that actually mean, that you need to be an expert at Linux? And so we get into memory mapping, and um, uh, how processes work, or how to what kind of profile should you use on a box. So it's just one of those things that I often see when we're looking at job descriptions, in when we're looking at, like, cloud or DevSecOps, or even security. Even when you're looking at Cisco, even when you're looking at Cisco routers and switches, the command line is still a a dumbed down Linux box, if you want to look at it like that. You still have some kind of command line situation that you're involved in. So it's just everywhere, and you don't even realize you're doing it. You just some people just go read stuff off of somebody's website, mainly the vendor website, and the vendor says CD to this directory, and you just type it in. You don't
Right.
know that you're actually changing directories to go here to do something else, but it's still there.
Yeah, you hit on so many points, and I'll start at the beginning. Um, my background is in system administration and network engineering. As a system administrator, I really only worked on Windows,
Mhm.
and as well as VMware. And a lot of VMware is Linux.
Mhm.
One of the things when I became a network engineer, I found that a lot of backend systems are Linux, and so even like our log server for one of the organizations that I worked with was Linux, and so I had to learn how to grep and search those logs. And I'm like, yo, how the heck do I look this up? I'm just
Regular
used to,
expression.
yeah, I'm used to just using the GUI, but then I realized, okay, there's an easier way to do this. Learn the command line in Linux, and you will feel a lot more comfortable and a lot
Yeah.
more efficient in your job.
Yeah, my students probably hate me because I don't even open up a GUI when we're training and stuff. Like, you're never gonna use it unless, You're using it for your personal stuff, or you want to teach somebody or a kid or something like that. But most of the time, we're on command line, and I'm hardcore. Somebody who want to have a flame war. My favorite thing to use is Vim. I'll go ahead and tell you that now. So, if somebody getting the flame and want to do Pico or Nano or something like that, not interested. And so,
Same here. I'm Vim as well. Um, okay, you mentioned that you have students. Can you kind of talk about your program and what you are doing?
yeah, so basically it's like where for me, let's back up. We started out with reason why we got started is because I just never really worked with other women who were in Linux administration or system administration using Linux or for that matter, I never worked with any black women. So I was like, man, I know it's more of us out here. Where are we at? So we started the group for that. We've evolved into so many more concepts and so many more things that we touch. But what I do try to do is I try to bring on people to the group that can show you like, okay, hey, here's what Red Hat is doing with Linux. Here's what IBM is doing with Linux. Here's what your foundational knowledge you need to know, and it's usually centered around DevSecOps. So I teach the RHCSA. From the RHCSA, they changed the RHCE. Now it just includes just it's really just Ansible underneath. And then from there, you have your operating system. You understand how to secure. You understand networking. Then you understand the configuration management tool. So now it's time to figure out, okay, let's move on to the cloud, or let's move on to infrastructure as code with Terraform or something like that. So I introduce what those things are, how to use them, when to use them, how to interview for particular jobs. What does your resume need to look like? Who's over here that's hiring? We spoke to them. They're ready for you to come in and do the interview. I try to look at Linux from a 360 perspective and not just as a system administration perspective, because Linux touches so much. Even on the embedded side, what does that look like? So we touch on the embedded side. I try to touch everything. So for me, it's everything, but it's usually the foundation is starting with the RHCSA. I could do the LPIC or the Linux Plus, but for me, because I've been in the DoD space and just looking out across the landscape, most people are looking for RHCSA. Where do you find the LPIC at? Well, or Ubuntu is when you start getting into Kubernetes, or somebody wants to do some type of cluster. And so you'll start seeing like Ubuntu come to, Debian based products come into play. But still, you need to understand how to maneuver and how to move around inside of a Linux box. So understanding basic commands, how to grep, how to sed, how to awk, how to use rsync data. I mean, everything. It's still those things that come along with Linux that I think are foundational that get you through so much. Once you learn one Linux platform, you can learn another one. For Debian to Red Hat or what have you.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now, your program, is this paid? How do people sign up? How do people join to
Uh,
learn from you?
just go to womeninlinux.org and hit connect and join our Slack group. So you can be a part of the Slack, so you keep up with what we're doing in Slack. And then the other part is meetup.com. You go to meetup.com, you look for Women in Linux, or meetup.com/Women in Linux. And then once you hit there, you'll see our meetups. We meet every Wednesday and every other Thursday. Every Wednesday is we go from the 124 to the 134, just what it is or whatnot. And people always ask me, is it paid or free? It's free. I can do so many other things on the other end, but just to get the foundational knowledge is where we start at. That's what we're looking to do.
That's what's up. That's what's up. And all of Tim's contact information is in the description of the video. Make sure y'all check this out. Another thing I'm asking y'all to do is hit the like button and share this out on your social media platforms, because Tim has been nice enough to take out her time to share her knowledge, and she's been dropping jewel after jewel in this live stream. So get those likes up and share this out on your social media platforms. And make sure after this live stream that you go and support Tam. Now, and I appreciate y'all. They getting them up quick. That's what's up. That's what I like to see. All right, Tam.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the RHCSA.
Correct.
Specifically, that's the Red Hat cert. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, it's a Red Hat certification system admin. Basically, it's just hey, you're new to Linux, and it's really the intro. There's actually a 024 class that Red Hat has that kind of goes over a summary of like this is Linux, this is your introduction. I advise everybody to go and just dip your toe in. You may not like it, right? It just may not be for you, right? It is, and that's okay, right? Then the other part is the 124 kind of, not kind of, but it goes through like, hey, here's how to write a bash script, here's how the file system work, here's how to add a user, here's ACLs, here's how we do some basic things. And the 134 picks up on storage, different storage video, from how to mount an NFS drive, LVM, and so forth. So just as some foundational stuff, right? And then once you get the foundation of Linux, then you can say, well, you know what? I got the RHCSA. I don't want to do anything else but go do cloud. You can go do that. But it's just really foundational. And so there's a career path with from Red Hat that they have. Google has a different type of career path, but mainly Red Hat has a career path where you can become what they call a certified architect, where it's five different you end up get five different Linux certs under that, but they're centered around what you choose, right? You could go you could do the RHCSA, the RHCE, and then you could pick up and do I think some security. You could do cloud based when they start talking about OpenShift and OpenStack. So you can get underneath that umbrella. But again, OpenShift is now we're talking about Kubernetes, and what that looks like. So again, it's still the buildup is the foundational is just the RHCSA, equivalent to the LPIC or the Linux Plus. But again, I'm on the other side of the house. I like the Red Hat products. I like the Yum package manager and so forth. Do I use Debian every day? Yeah. I mean, I'm all over the place. I'm in three clouds every day, so it doesn't matter to me.
That right there, that part, you're in three clouds every day, and I
Mm.
think what you just stated when it comes to learning the cloud, people believe that you need to learn, or that people that are just starting mention that they want to learn all three, get a certification in all three tracks. Um, since you are in all three, what would you start for someone that wants to get started with the cloud?
Um, I know people are gonna hate me for this one. What I think is easy to learn. I know everybody's gonna go with AWS because they're popular. I think it's easier to learn GCP to me. I just think their interface is easier to learn, to maneuver and get around. And AWS has done a better job. Does GCP have a large part of the market? Absolutely not. Does AWS have a large part of the market? Yes. So does Azure. But I don't think Azure is easier to learn than what AWS would be. So for me, it goes GCP, AWS, and then Azure as far as learning. And when I say learning, I'm just talking fundamentals like, hey, install the AWS CLI, use AZ login to, if you install the Azure CLI, then use AZ login to pull up and then start learning. Once you start learning how CLI and actually API endpoints work, when you start learning those things right there, I don't care what cloud you're in, they all gonna work similar to. There's always gonna be, AWS EC2 instance, blah blah blah, some CLI thing that you're gonna use and do that with. But I think for me, if I was just in the GUI of GCP, I think it's easier to learn. I think it makes sense. I think when you start looking at Azure, there's some nuances there. Can you can you walk through any of these things and point and click and get through them? Sure. But the ultimate goal is, can I teach it back to someone once I did it? And if you can't do that, then, you need to spend a little bit more time. But that's just my thought process.
Right. I like that, and I appreciate you answering that, because I hear a lot of people mention AWS, not because it's easier or harder, but just because the market share is larger with AWS. But starting with GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform, getting a foundation there to understand the cloud, and then taking those principles to another platform that you may be interested in. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm not saying you got to get certified in Google Cloud Platform. I just think the interface and what you see doesn't overwhelm someone who's never done it before.
Right.
And I've tested that in my classes. And the other piece, like before, they just added it over the past year or two. You couldn't just really click on the machine inside of AWS and get your screen. I think it's harder for people who have a Windows box. They got to do the PPK and get that set up with putty and all that. You don't have to do all of that inside of GCP. So that's what I mean, like a learning curve from that perspective for a user that doesn't know, like, okay, what is a PPK? What is putty? Now I'm adding in more complications for that user. They now have it. Now I think you got a single click inside of AWS that you can just single click, get a interface, and then go. But that didn't exist for some time. That wasn't always the case.
Okay, you mentioned interfaces when it comes to the cloud. Now, is that saying that there's no command line when you work with the cloud?
No, that's just saying, like, a lot of people who, especially if you're coming from working in a GUI every single day of your life, if you never open up a terminal and you got some black text and a white background, why am I here? What does this mean? Right? So easing the person from that GUI phase to the simple setup of, okay, you've now logged in and you played with the interface. Now let's move you over to the command line and let's understand the structure of commands. And I think a lot of people, and this is where Linux gets into play here. When you start understanding, okay, I want to move a file from one directory to another. If you do a move dash dash help or man on move, there's a certain structure that move command needs, right? It needs to have a source and a destination, and you have what we call options. Well, that same concept still applies when you're looking at the command line for your AWS or CLI or your Azure CLI or GCP CLI. There's a command, okay, AWS dash dash help. What can I do? Oh, I want to act on this resource. That resource may be a load balancer. Okay, well, what do you want to do with that load balancer? Oh, give me my other options that I can do. There's a certain structure that those commands follow. You learn that in Linux. You learn that in AWS too, CLI. But if you're not familiar with that, there's a learning curve with that. I think Linux provides that learning curve already that you jump over versus just starting out with AWS or something of that nature. Like, that's just my thought.
No. I love that. Thank you for sharing that and providing that insight. Because when I first hear about the cloud, I've always think GUI, but there is a CLI aspect, and it's Linux based. If I'm understanding.
Yeah. So I mean, usually you can use it on the Windows side, but it's really you're talking to some endpoints. But there's a CLI that you install even on your Mac or on your Linux box or on your Windows box that communicates with those endpoints, and from there you do whatever you're allowed to do based upon your permissions and so forth.
Got it. Got you. So back to the certifications. I want to get some questions from the chat. So if you all have questions, drop them in the chat, and then I'll answer those next. Before I get to the chat, the question that I have for you, Tam, is this: certifications. How important are they when it comes to getting in the field or in tech with Linux skills? How important are certifications to get in a position with Linux skills in tech?
All right, so I'm probably gonna date myself, but I give you what happened to me and what I've seen happen to other people. I started out, I hadn't graduated from college yet, and I got my first job as a Linux administrator, over using high performance computing. So this is at University of Washington, and so I didn't have a certification then, right? But I understood how Linux worked, how clusters work, how memory management work, how security work, from that perspective. Moving forward, do I see people require that you have like an LPIC or RHCSA? Some jobs do, some jobs don't. Some people don't care that you got the cert. They're still gonna interview you anyway to see if you know what you're talking about, right? So for me, I haven't put weight into the certifications unless a job is saying, hey, we need everybody to get certified on X, Y, and Z because it's a mandate. I haven't put weight into those certifications only because nobody's never required me to use those certifications to get those certifications. Can I read? Yes. Can I go and get the certifications? Yes, but nobody's never required me to actually go in and get those certifications. Do I put weight for someone who is coming out of college and they have no idea what the cloud is? I would say go get a certification, right? Or at least attempt to read the material so you can be well suited for an interview. And so if you're reading that material, you're 9 times out of 10 studying certification material anyway. So you might as well go and get the certification, or at least attempt to get the certification, so you can be well versed in the interview. Those are my thoughts. A lot of people put emphasis on certifications. Again, we're it is a global fight right now. When you're talking about IBM is looking to train, I think 40 million, and then Google is looking to train 30 million people. We're in a global fight, right? So it's no longer, is again, everybody's going to start getting these certifications, so the numbers are going to go down salary wise, right? And then just to have the certification is going to be just like, okay, that's a mute point. But how do you apply the knowledge? Do you understand the customer's problem? Can you solve the customer problem? And at that point in time, the customer is the person that you're interviewing with. That's the customer. Can you be the solution when you walk in the door? If you can't be the solution when you walk in the door and you got a certification, it did you no good, right? You didn't understand how to communicate and how to talk to the person to help them solve their problem. They got the job open because they got a problem to solve, and they're looking for you to come in with the expertise and the knowledge in order to solve it. Did you listen? Are you taking notes? Are you looking at the big picture? Are you breaking it down into modular concepts in order to solve that?
I didn't want to say nothing. I wanted everybody to soak that up real quick. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because we get paid to solve problems, and that's
Yeah.
often missed in IT, especially when it comes to when we talk about certifications. You know, you get a certain certification, and you expect the bag to just be handed to you,
Right.
and that's not the case.
Right. You got to prove your point. I mean, have I flunked on interviews? Absolutely. 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 I've flunked. I flunked on some interviews a couple of weeks ago, right? But I redeemed myself in the other one.
Yeah, it
But
it,
it
it happens.
it happens, but it also comes down to again, study. Like, you got to be a student of the game. If you're not a student of the game, I don't care how many certifications you get, it doesn't matter if you're not looking at what they're talking about at conferences, how they're coming up with solutions, what's new, what's coming out, like EPBF. I may be having that acronym backwards, but if you're not looking at that, if you're not looking at where they're going with AI and quantum and what's coming down the pipe, and how packets flow, right? We'll still get back to the Cisco networking, and or if you want to look at Palo Alto or whatever little Juniper, whatever you want to use, right? There's still a flow of packets, and you have to understand how those packets flow. Are we enabling security end to end? Is this a fast transmission? What's slowing it down, right? These are all things that we have to look at. And so you can get a certification and not even understand how packets flow. You might not even understand DNS, but you
Right.
need to.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. But there's something that we have to mention though, right here. So, for my network engineers that are watching this, and for people that are in the industry, let's say in security, there's a key word that a key skill that if you know it right now in the industry, you put on your resume, you may get an interview, and that's Python. Like Python is super hot, and if you know it and put it on your resume, you may get an interview. But before Python, back when in the 2000s, there was a key word that you put on your interview. You want to talk about that, Tail?
Well, for me, it was Linux. That
There you
was
go.
for me, and it's always been Linux. But the other part, even before that, because we haven't even touched on storage and how storage and fiber channels and uh just I mean, like I could go on, I get excited about it, but we haven't even touched on how that works, how to set up an Oracle rack, how to set up a blade enclosure, how to set up different servers, HPE cluster or whatever, how RAID controllers. Like I can go on, but understanding fundamentals of storage and networking and Linux and all that stuff comes together, and that's why I get excited about Linux, because Linux gives you that insight into those concepts before you even have to touch somebody's $10,000 rack, and that's a small rack, that's a small server.
Right.
In today, a machine could cost one machine by itself can cost $200,000, right?
Easy. Yeah.
Depending on what kind of memory you got, what kind of RAID controller you have set up in there, security,
Yeah.
ILO, and don't get me started. But again, you can get into to that. So though Linux has always been a baseline. People, you get challenged all the time in interviews, but just talking to people that are like, oh, so Linux, and you be like, yeah, like operating system. I want to know. Oh, you must be a project manager. No, I'm not a project manager. But, let's get on the command line. And that was one of the conversations that I had with Kelsey on one of our live streams. We got to talking about. He was like, and I don't even remember it. And he was saying that the guy, me and him, we were all standing there talking, and the guy was like, "Oh, so Linux?" And he was like, he's like, you just kept hitting him with, like, yeah, and do you know this, and do you know this? And he's like, never assume anything about somebody, right? So don't assume when you go into the interview that they're going to know who you are. You got to go in and actually show who you are. And to
Right.
order to show who you are, you're going to have to listen to the questions and listen to the problem and break that down and understand it. I'm a very visual person, so I try to give someone else a visual diagram of what I hear and what your problem is, and here's how to solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Now, going back to my initial questions, statement was that in the 2000s, Linux was, if you knew Linux, you were in high demand. And so, one of the things, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because with your career being in that trajectory path, you didn't need certifications because you knew Linux. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Does that still ring true today?
Yeah, it's still the do you know Linux? Do you understand uh how packets flow? Have you ever used TCP dump? Have you ever used Wireshark? Have you ever designed infrastructure? What does that look like? How does LDAP work? Triple S work? And that's on prem. Even in the cloud, there's still concepts around Linux that you still need to understand. How to get things to work, how to automate something. Whether you're writing a Bash script or a Python script to bootload A server router, you use user data to and write a script and user data to boot up whatever it is that you want to boot up. So that's still the case. Is it easier to go ahead and have the certification? Yeah, push you ahead of the crowd. But again, you want to be able to have, you want to set yourself apart on your resume, and so you can get the not certification, so you can get the interview. And then once you get the interview, you can go from there. So can you get the certification? Can you not get the certification? The quickest, here's my quick thing. Take time to do a mock interview, and I do mock interviews,
Okay.
and I grill people left and right, right. And if you can't pass the mock interview, then you need to study. That's just what it is, right?
Yeah.
So what are they looking for? I get questions all the time. Okay, here's an Ansible playbook. What's wrong with it? Here's a Terraform file. What's wrong with it? Here's a Bash script. What's wrong with it? Write a Bash script. Write me a Python script, right? Where the case may be. Python goes hand in hand right now. We're gonna see a change from Python to Rust, or Rust and Linux go hand in hand. We're going to see that coming down. That's coming down the pipe, and that's all under the AI machine learning situation. That's also with Rust being brought into the kernel. I know. I think Linus said it's not, but there's a big project out there that's pushing that. So it's still on the watchful eye. It'll be coming though.
I look to the chat. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm trying not to hog these questions, but every time Tail comments, she has something else that just sucks me in. And you just mentioned that Rust is going to overthrow Python on Linux, even more so
Yeah,
than Go. Even more so than Go.
yeah. From the perspective of, we have the big need for on the embedded side, right? So when we're looking at, and this is from the AI machine learning perspective, when we're looking at devices sitting out on the edge and gathering data, of course C is still there. Of course C++ is still there, and but I don't hear a lot of people talking about Go at the edge as much. It's still there as much as I hear Rust coming around. So when I say Rust coming around now, let's put it in this perspective. Let's look at it from this perspective. And a friend of mine brought this up to me. Do you know what else was founded in 1991 besides Linux? Just take a wild guess.
It wasn't Python
It was blockchain.
in
How
1991.
in 1991. Now, how often through the years have you heard people talk about blockchain up until recently?
That's it.
Say the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 7, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about learning now for something that's coming down the pipe in the future. Things that you will see, right? I'm not saying that like tomorrow you're gonna wake up and Rust is gonna be in the kernel. What I'm saying is, be prepared. Look at where the industry is flowing, where how data is flowing, how languages are moving, what people are looking at. If you go look up AI machine learning, you're gonna see a lot of Rust. You're gonna see a lot of Python. You'll see that. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if I hear this talk about Rust in the kernel, where is that going? Who's a part of this? What does that look like? When would this happen? Just being aware.
Okay. So is Rust a scripting language? And for someone that is learning Python, what what projects or something that they could use Rust to get started with?
Right now, I think it's just best to start with the basics, right?
Okay.
Let's start with basics. The same thing you would do in Python, right?
Right.
You learn what the structures are, how to open a file, how to close a file, how to read a file. Start out with the basics, and then start looking at different open source projects and how they're using Rust and what they're using Rust for. And that
Okay.
gives you a little bit more insight of where projects and stuff are going with Rust, and things that you can do with it as well too. And I always encourage people to, you don't have to just learn one language. You can learn another language, but just understand when to use that tool, right? We got many tools in our toolbox. It's just when to use it.
Right. 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 I'm looking at the comments. Um, the Somebody mentioned something about viruses and how to remove viruses from the bootloader,
Mm-hmm.
which made me think of something because this is often stated that Linux doesn't get viruses. Is that a true statement?
No, we get viruses, right? But we don't get viruses as often as Windows go. But again, back in the day, everybody was Windows based, so they were always attacking Windows, right?
Hmm.
But again, you got to remember Windows, not Windows, but Linux is an open source project. So with that being said, if this is another thing that came up, which kind of gets into the solar wind thing, if I can inject something into the supply chain, if I can inject the virus into the supply chain, what makes you think that I can't inject it into Linux, right? Into the code of Linux. So who's protecting that code base, right? The security of that code base and what that looks like is where it can easily be. But also you can get viruses in Linux. I mean, just like you can get it in Windows. Like you gotta have a Linux box and somebody click on a JPEG and, and you go, you've affected your box, right?
Right.
So, there's ways, but is it prevalent that people are saying like, oh my God, I got a virus on my Linux box? That's not most people are Majority of the people are not running Linux. Your mom is not running a Linux box as her desktop. She's probably using Windows or a Mac or something of that nature. That's just not native. So it's out there, but it's not as prevalent as I would like to say. But it can happen. I won't say nothing won't ever happen.
Yeah. My mom is all command line. My mom
Okay,
gangster.
cool.
Nah, I'm joking.
Okay. I was like, good. I tell her to come to the show. Let me interview
Right, right, right. Nah. So yeah, that's good to know because a lot of time that is something that you hear when it comes to why you should use Linux because you don't get viruses. But I'm glad you cleared that up. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, cool. I'm gonna see if you all have questions. Please drop them in the chat. I'm gonna make sure I give you all time because Tam, you have a lot of support here, and people got questions.
Okay. Yeah, we should have some people in co-founder DC in the background. She should be in here
Shout out to
dropping
D.
stuff. Yeah, she should be dropping stuff or whatnot uh inside the chat. But I mean, I also want people to understand like where Linux is at. And I think we don't talk about that enough. People think we're just talking about the cloud, and I'm not. I'm also talking about Linux in your smartwatches. I'm also talking about Linux inside of uh, your. There's some Linux-based TVs. We're talking about Linux from a perspective of your infotainment center in your car, the Camry. I think the 2018 Camry has it. The BMW has it. Who uses Linux? Uh, I know for a fact BMW has uses Linux. There are some other automakers that use Linux. You can go to the Linux Foundation and find that out. Toyota uses Linux. Then we talk about space and using Linux as well too from satellites. Then we can also get into just main desktops, Kubernetes underneath, right? Is Linux based. You can look at some slimmed down command line version of your home router or your actual Cisco switches as well. Juniper, right? I mean, the list goes on. It's not a place where Linux doesn't touch. Even your refrigerator, yeah, with your with on the background with the TVs and so forth and so on. Those things are Linux based. Even your washer and dryer, right? Being able to send a text. There's some type of command line utility that's a stripped down version of Linux that is using. So it's everywhere. So you could be on the hardware side of Linux. You could be on the software side of Linux. You could be in both. You could be you could be building out the kernel. You could be building packages for Linux. Like we're it's not just one aspect of Linux. And so that's why I say I talk about Linux from a 360 perspective, not just it's in the cloud or it's on prem. It's everywhere.
No, I got you. I got you. I understand, and I appreciate you breaking that down because that is important to understand how vast and how widely Linux is in use.
Mm-hmm. That you don't even know you're using it.
Right. True
Because somebody
story.
put a nice little GUI on top of it, right?
Yeah. True story. All right. So the first question is from Sam Jones, one of our moderators. Thank you, Sam, for holding down the chat. Appreciate you tuning in every week, family. All right. This question is, what is your day to day like, and what is your main focus in Linux? Because it seems like you wear many hats.
I do. So as a Linux administrator, you are going to wear many hats. So my day to day consists of building pipelines. Right now, the project I'm working on is building out a pipeline to build out um, AKS. I'm building out a Kubernetes cluster in Azure using Terraform. I may use Packer from HashiCorp. I may use Vault in a day, standing up a Vault cluster. I may use console. I may use a bash script. I may write a Python script. It could be anything, but basically DevSecOps is my day to day. So that could consist of many things outside of my day to day as my full time job. I do security work as well too. So I may be securing somebody's product or some application or something of that nature. What in a DevSecOps capacity, still the same thing, but now we start talking about, well, how do you secure your code, pre-commits, understanding Git flow, understanding Git ops. And then on the flip side of all of that, I may be with my Women in Linux group and talking about, basic system administration. What does that look like? What could your job look like? What could that entail? Do you start at the help desk? Do you not start at the help desk? Would you start with somewhere at a knock? Would you work in a data center? Would you not? Would you start with cloud? So it could consist of a lot of things when it comes to that. But core foundational skills would be on my day to day core tools, I should say, would be Linux, Terraform, Ansible, Python, Bash, and troubleshooting is another skill that people don't talk about because that's a skill.
That is a real skill. Um, so for troubleshooting, there's like tools that I can't live without. Back when I was an engineer,
Hmm.
OneNote was one of them because one of the things that I found that helped me become a better troubleshooter is documenting my steps
Yep.
along the way.
Yep. I talk about it all the time. I tell I do two things. I talk about in my group is journal what you do every day. Cause when you get to the end of the year, somebody's always asking you to write your own performance review. So
Hmm.
at least you can go back and say what you did.
Man,
And the other one is mind mapping. Being
I
able
like
to
that.
mind map your even if it's a problem, right? Being able to mind map, say, okay, this is the big problem. Here's possible solutions I can take. Here's what I went down. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. And then follow those steps and say, okay, that didn't work. Just giving yourself the visual to understand. So when you're talking to someone, they were like, okay, well, I don't understand your thought process. You like, okay, no problem. Let me share my screen. I can then share my screen and show you what my thought process versus me explaining it to you. So now it makes you an effective communicator, gives you a better communication. And you can take that screenshot or you can take that picture and then throw it into your Jira board or whatever the case may be, so somebody can understand your flow, your thought process, and what approach you were taking, and then it helps train others to think in that same pattern too, because that's how you learn. So oftentimes people don't understand how you learn and how you thinking. Sometimes you got to teach others on how you learn, so that way they're effective in their communication with, so you can understand the problem.
Effective excuse me, effective communication is important, in business, just in general, especially
Mm-hmm.
when you're on a team and you're working with customers. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I love that. For mind mapping, I use MindNode on my Mac. It's this
Mm-hmm.
app called MindNode.
Mm-hmm.
What is there an app that you use specifically?
Yeah, I'm a sucker for a paid program. So I have a subscription to Lucid Charts and my Master, but I use Lucid Charts to draw out not just curriculum but career paths or just my thoughts. So
Right.
I go back and forth between those. I'm not telling people to use those because those are paid things. You could probably more than likely find some stuff that's free. I even think in Word they have a mind map you can use in Word, and I think Google Sheets have something you can use with mind map. But I'm just one of those people like, hey, I want to be able to, you know, have all the little fancy tools that go with it.
Yeah, and I think you can collaborate on Lucid Charts. I've used
Hmm.
that as well.
And
That's a
what
good
other
tool.
and the other thing about I like about Lucid Chart, if I'm building like complicated, like a complicated infrastructure or something like that,
Yeah.
it's you have to pay for it. I haven't paid for it yet, but I've used it in another project. You can then just have your credentials sign up and create an account for that particular user, and it'll go out and grab all your EC2 instances or whatever you're using out there, and it'll draw a map out for you. So you don't have to draw the map. I'm like, oh,
That's
we
fire.
we've been needed this.
That's fire. You, I my old mentor at my last job, he's at Cisco now, and so I'm building out this project for. I'm trying to find a Porsche 944, right? And I've been
Mm,
hunting Craigslist to do this, but I'm looking in all these different cities. So I'm building an app that'll take all my queries, put them in a database, and give me like a GUI or hit me on WebEx every day with the specifications for the Porsche that I'm looking for. And
mm-hmm,
so I was talking to my guy Gus, and he uses something called Whimsical. It's called Whimsical. I never heard of it, but we were talking about how my app should look. And so he drew it out on Whimsical on, okay, you need your database, you need the database microservice, you know, you may need Celery or Redis, and then you need your app and all these different pieces. And so once he
mm,
was done, he was able to send me the link in Whimsical, like right from there. And now
mm-hmm.
I can go in and edit it. So I was like, you know what? I may switch to Whimsical when I'm drawing out my apps. Really powerful app.
Okay, I have to check that out. I have
Yeah,
to check
yeah.
out what's cool because I got some apps that I wanna build for the community that I think that we don't have. It's something I've been thinking about for 5 years. I just never dove off into it to do it, but it's time now.
Make it open source. Let the community be a part of it.
Yeah, a couple of years ago they was giving $100,000 out to founders for an open source project. It was 100,000, and then I think they gave you another 120,000. But the 100,000 was to get started on your open source project, so you can hire people. And then once you got the foundation going on that project, then they gave you another 120,000. It's just taking the time to have somebody help you with that project. Yeah, I guess you could take that and say, here, we'll do it part time. You don't have to do it full time. You do it
Right.
part time, but you got to be on it. Because you only got $100,000. You can't waste that. You're not gonna get paid that 150 an hour that you want. I
Right.
give you some equity though. You know, and-
Hey, and that equity can turn out to be a real bag for real.
yeah, depending on the project, depending on
Yeah,
what you're doing.
yeah, for sure. All right. Let's get to some more questions real quick.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. This next question is from Gaming with Persona. Would you recommend learning Linux for a cybersecurity career path?
Yes. Underneath that is actually Kali Linux.
Mm,
Uh, Most people go under, but I recommend understanding just how to maneuver, how to move around, where log files store, how to set up IP addresses, how to set up subnets, how to add a virtual NIC, how to what does Docker do when you install Docker? What does actually Docker do? If you ever install Docker, on in Rail 7, and I think in Rail 8 they switched over. But usually what would happen is you would install Docker and you would need IP tables, and then once you do the installation of Docker, Docker creates a actual input chain inside of IP tables to start up so that you can have the communication between those between those Docker containers. So if you didn't play around with Linux, you wouldn't know that that's what it was actually doing and what actually happened, right? And so now when we start talking about, okay, well, if I'm doing cybersecurity, my question would be is how do you secure the operating system? How do you do pen testing? How do you secure the networking? How do you make sure? And this gets way off into like the deep of when we start talking about service discovery and console and all of that. But anyway, when we start talking about cloud security, how do we secure the cloud? We can't have if we didn't have networking, we wouldn't have the cloud, right? We wouldn't
Right.
be at the top right now, right?
Right.
So how do we secure that communication end to end? How do we, stop people from bombing? Like Zoom had that big problem. But again, would I learn Linux? Yes. As a foundation, you can start with Kali Linux, and then you can move over and start looking at vulnerabilities. I recommend people, anybody, is to start looking at daily CVEs for the operating systems that you use. And so there's a CVE database out there where you can go and look up, like Linux has this vulnerability, Mac had this vulnerability, Windows had this vulnerability, your Android had this vulnerability. So you can get an understanding of, okay, well, how important is cybersecurity? What are these updates actually doing? Don't just install an update till you look and see what it's actually doing, right? So you can
Right.
understand what's going on there. But I yes, I do recommend Linux in the long run for cybersecurity.
I love that. Kali Linux is free. You can install a VM, get started with it like immediately. It
Yep,
isn't too
and
hard to set
the
up.
other one too is Wireshark.
Yep.
Wireshark, I would recommend anybody, any admin, Windows or Linux, understand Wireshark and how to use it, how to use TCP dump, how to filter on that, how to know where traffic is coming from, and understanding that goes a long way in troubleshooting.
The, network engineers. She's on the DevOps system administration side, telling system admins and DevOps engineers to learn Wireshark. Network engineers get comfortable in Wireshark.
Mm,
I think when it comes to looking at those, examining those packets, it's important to understand packet flows. It's important to understand the port numbers. And when you are troubleshooting an application, understanding, okay, what services are running for that application.
mhm.
All right, is DNS actually getting to where it needs to go? Because sometimes there may be a firewall blocking the
Yep.
DNS connection that's going out to the internet when it's supposed to be internal. Like understanding these traffic flows and then be able to pull up Wireshark and examine these packets. I mean, that's a skill, like you mentioned, for,
PCAPs.
yeah, those
Understand
PCAPs.
pickups. Like so that I lump all of that under Linux because that's how I learned. I
Yeah,
learned how to troubleshoot packets, how to set up Cisco routers and switches, DCE DTE cables, connect them up.
yeah,
Let's flash the BIOS. Let's get this upgraded. Let's update the firmware on this Dell machine. Let's then set up this RAID controller. Let's then set up a management network. What does that look like? What are we doing? Do we want static IPs or not? Are we communicating here? I need to poke a hole through that firewall on this port to do X, Y, and Z. Who do I need to contact? What
right.
form do I need to fill out? What needs to happen? So that to me, that all falls on the troubleshooting in Linux for me. But somebody may be like, oh, that's a separation. But I think this where, again, like I say, the Linux admin and DevSecOps kind of comes into play because in DevSecOps, you're gonna do all that troubleshooting yourself. You're gonna
Yeah,
use you're gonna use curl commands and the whole nine.
yeah, because in the network engineer aspect, whether you're on a Palo, there's TCP dumps. Whether you're on the ASA, there's TCP dumps. Whether you're on a Linux box, there's TCP dumps. If
Yep.
you're in F5, there's TCP dumps to where you
Yep.
can do command line commands and do these PCAPs. So
Yep.
that's a great point. I love that you mentioned that.
Yep. I put all that all lumps together for me.
Awesome. Awesome. There's a question from AJK. He says, what is that Linux management called? Ansible?
Configuration management tool. Well, one of them that is Red Hat bought them back in I think 2015 is Ansible. It used to be Puppet, used to be native, but Puppet is another configuration management tool. So is Chef and so is Salt. Primarily, you'll see a lot of people use Puppet and Chef. Salt, I've seen used places like at Bloomberg or something of that nature. Chef, I haven't. People still use Chef for like inspecting machines and so forth, but I haven't seen where people are like, oh my God, I need for you to know Chef inside of their resume and stuff like that. But if you know one or the other, most people will hire you from that point because they figure you understand the premise behind the basis of automation tools, so you can pick up on any automation tool.
Awesome. Awesome. Network bruh, what's good, family? His
Hey,
question is, yeah, that's my guy. His question is, have you answered the question is, what's your favorite Linux distro?
the one that pays the most.
Look, some people don't like people talking about money, but it's important to understand that there's a lot of opportunity in this tech space. And when you find those breadcrumbs that people leave behind, soak them up and pick them up and run with it, because what she's telling you is that it isn't about finding something that you are comfortable in, and she goes
The
after
need to
the opportunity.
change. The need changes. I could be on a job that is using Red Hat, and then I could switch over to a job that's using Ubuntu, and then I could switch over to another job that's using IBM, right? So the need changes. So again, I'm okay. So for me, I'm agnostic to most stuff. I lean towards Red Hat, but if somebody told me to come along and I had to go get the L pick and they was gonna pay me X, Y, and Z money, I'm gonna go get the L pick if I had to, whatever. I just for me is what do I need to do to get the job done? What tool sets do I need to use? What problem are we solving in order to get it done? Right? So but my favorite distro is right now is me. I'm my favorite distro.
Oh man. Look, it's a blessing when you can get the bag and be able to help people without having to worry about the financial part. And yeah, so I admire what you're doing and what you do, and I understand it because once you get to a certain point, finances, and you can manage that, and you're good.
Yeah.
Now you are free to give back as how you see fit. I see. Yeah, I don't want to talk about that, but I just admire what you do.
You all right? Well, I don't know if you know my goal. My goal is for everybody in my group that, and I talk about it all the time. I know they get tired of me talking about it, but in my group is for everybody to make 200,000. That's my minimum goal.
Let's go.
There's a reason for that. It has nothing to do with so that you can go out and ball or whatnot. I want you to ball on building wealth. That's what I want
Yeah,
you to do. Is ball on building wealth. And what does that look like? That's my goal, right?
yeah,
And I said to myself yesterday was, I think I need to change that. I think I need to push that up because we're at a time now where that 200,000 is gonna be nothing in 10 years, right? So it is that like I want people to make that now. So what does that look like? Um, I'm always on the DevSecOps side. That can range from 100,000 to 400,000 depending on who you're talking to. But then there's also cybersecurity that's measured into DevSecOps as well too. So that pushes you forward. But that's my goal for everybody that's in my group. That's what I am pushing. That is my men that I want to see people at, so they can build wealth, so they can go out and buy the multifamily unit or start an investment fund or go get that put money away in an ETF and let it build. Or you want to do blockchain, fine, whatever, but I want you to have the ability to not be like, oh, I can't do it because I didn't get paid on the 15th, and so I got to wait till the first, and then I have, I want you to be able to have that flexibility. But that's my personal goal for everybody in my group.
Let
That's
me ask. I love that. I love that, and people will be surprised how once you get certain skills and you actually get experience with those skills, 200K will be in your inbox.
Yes.
It's not something that's far fetched. Does it take a
Yeah.
lot of work? Hell yeah, it
Yeah.
takes a lot of work. But once you establish yourself in that space, your number at that point, if you have the right skills, can start at 200K and go up from there.
Correct. I mean, I've spoken to many different people who are, starting out at 300, or they're starting out at a million, or they got a sign-on bonus for 100,000. You
Man,
know, like, you
I
know,
didn't think 300 was possible. I'm just gonna say that I
yeah,
didn't think it was
yeah, man.
possible.
I mean, I get it. I understand. Until you get that call, or you get that sent over to you, and a lot of people like, oh, uh that must be you getting paid 150,000 base, and then you got a bonus. So that, nope, I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about your base at 300, and then whatever the case may be after that. I'm strictly talking about base. I'm not talking about total comp. I want to
Yeah,
clarify that because I know a lot of people like to talk about, don't forget about the total comp and the RSUs and so forth and so on. Some companies are not even doing RSUs out for 4 years anymore. They're only doing it for a year. So what does that look like? Do you want to stay with a company for 4 years until your stock is vested? I mean, you have to ask those questions. Do you see yourself being in a company for 4 years for that stock to be vested? So can you make your money and turn it into tax write-offs, right? Working from home, what does that look like? So I can get into it.
hey,
I'm sure there'll be some negative comments, but I'm here for
no, no, no,
it.
no, no, no. I think it's important to understand when it comes to when we talk about these numbers. We're not out here selling. Well, I know I'm not selling you dreams. Like it,
Yep.
this takes works.
Yep.
Uh, like not just a month worth of work, not just 6 months worth of work. It's gonna take maybe
Takes
years.
time.
Yeah, it takes
Takes
time.
time. I mean, you mean, if you are, and I don't want to talk about dream versus passion and so forth and so on. If you're about it gets back to fundamentals for me. If you love solving problems, right? If you understand what the problem is and then how to use the different tools to solve the problem, or you can integrate into a team and show not where your value, not necessarily where your value is, but where they may be missing out on something where you can add value to. Right? You always want to add value to something, right? Anything
Yeah,
in life you want to add to it, right? So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking from a perspective of, you know, you may you may go down the route and get Terraform certified, get lab certified. You may go and just do the whole certification track, right? But if you don't understand how all of those things work together and how companies or teams are using that, and we're talking about high performance teams, then it doesn't matter,
right,
right?
right, right. Look, I can have this conversation all day because let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. To be successful in any career path in IT, what are some fundamental traits that you need?
Any career, first off, uh, reading. with comprehension, right? Troubleshooting, uh, understanding where the industry is moving. What is the company? What problem is the company trying to solve? When you're doing an interview, you need to interview them, right? Don't take it as you're being interviewed and grilled and you don't have any questions. You should always have questions. The other part is, for me, a fundamental is just what I do is network, not network just on your team, but network on other teams. What is the company doing when they have a meeting, a gathering or something like that, virtually or whatnot? Ask what problems do the other teams have, right? Because you want to find out what they're doing. You may not even like what you're doing anymore and want to hop over to another team or what have you. um those are that's You can call it networking, but I also call it just understanding where you can add value as well too, because or where you may see something that you just want to explore, right? Be curious about tech. Uh Look on, like, I attend conferences. I look at Bright Talk. I go attend conferences virtually. I sign up. I get alerts probably like in the morning, probably like 30 alerts in the morning. Because I'm getting an alert about somebody posting something about crypto. I'm getting an alert about blockchain. I'm getting an alert about somebody talking about what's going on with Cisco, what's going on with HP. Somebody is I want to know what you're doing, where you're going, why, who's the player in it, what problem is this product solving for the customer? Who's the customer? Who's using that? Why? And then I go look up jobs. I'm always curious about what they're doing, why they're doing it, who's moving in that industry, who's showing up to the conferences, who are the sponsors at the conference. Why did that person pay $100,000 at that for that conference to show up and be a sponsor? What are their showcase? What are they showcasing? What is Dell showcasing? What is HP showcasing? Where's hardware moving to? Where's open source projects moving to? What open source projects are out there? I'm always curious about what they're doing and where they're going, because those open source projects, those sponsors and stuff like that, they're showcasing something, and I just want to know what it is so I can understand. Okay, I see that we're moving in this direction. We're speeding up networking, even with you with Cisco DevNet when that came out. Now we're talking about, okay, we're really talking about automation. We're really talking about automation with that, right? And so what does that look like? What does that mean? How are we moving that? How are we solving problems with software? Are we using switches as physical switches? Or are we moving switches to being a switch in the software? And what value did that provide? Is it when we're talking about constant connections, right? When we're talking about 100,000 connections in, what, a second or something like that. What problem are we solving for that customer or that application? So that's, for me, is troubleshooting, looking out across the landscape, being being open-minded about what's coming down the path, attending conferences, and last but not least, write out what your discoveries are so you can convey that to other people, so you're not sitting there holding all the information,
Right.
right? You got other people that's in the industry with you so they can see what's coming down. It's nothing like sitting at a job for 5 years and you got the same skills that you had when you came in with. You wasted your time.
I've been there. I've been there, so I can relate. That's one of the reasons that I do what I do, because I've been stuck. I've been lost. I've been in tech trying to figure it out. And so that's a great point. Look, you dropped so many jewels today.
Thank you. I hope everybody got a chance to understand, like, tech is ever evolving and we're moving quickly. We're moving quicker than what we have before.
Yeah.
Um, and there's some fundamentals are there, but we're exploding now. So don't get stuck.
There's no, I think when I was stuck, there weren't as many, there really weren't any resources Now there's no reason to be stuck because there's so many people like yourself and so many other people that are out here
Pushing.
sharing information and knowledge and mentoring. Like your webinars that you're doing weekly are free. So
Mhm.
this is free mentorship from somebody that's been doing it, along with others that are doing it. And there's too many resources out there not to be making progress in your career.
Yep. And not only that, I always tell people to give back. Learn, take what you learn and teach it to somebody else. That's how you know it.
Yeah,
Can't teach it to somebody else and explain to a person, then you got to go back to the drawing books and make sure you can explain that to the point where somebody can pick it up. And if they don't even know what it is, right? Being able to curate a story and tell that story to someone that has no clue is an art.
facts. You mentioned something about always add value in the workplace, right? Wherever you go. I think something that we were kind of talking about is documentation and its importance. Like,
Hmm.
if you can't add any more value in the organization because you're working with people that are extremely bright and it's intimidating, the minimal amount of value you can add is documentation,
Yep.
in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
Yep, documentation goes a long way. Self-documenting goes a long way too. When we're talking about, this gets into your pre-commits and your flow. What does that look like? A lot of people are looking at technical documentation as, something. I think that's usually more geared towards the customer, from that perspective, because on the back end, we're not looking at technical documentation from the perspective of building it. We're self-documenting our code when we're doing it. But if the customer has to come along and look at what we built or the product that we built, that's when that technical documentation comes up. But it's also, as much as people don't like to talk about it, a diagram goes a long way.
Facts. Yes.
A
Yes.
diagram goes a long way. Like being able to look at a diagram and say, where, this does this, that, and the other, it helps a whole lot. It helps. I know it helps me. I'm not sure how everybody else feels about it. I know it helps me when I need to visualize, like, what are we actually building?
Right.
Oh, okay, these are the things that I need to build. Okay, cool.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. Look, hey, Tam, we got to get you back on the channel. Um, and soon,
Anytime.
this, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I say anytime. Don't forget about the cars now. You was
Oh yeah, you like exotic cars. You like his. All right. Before we out of here, let's talk about these cars. What
all right.
exotic cars? What kind of cars you like?
Uh, I like a lot of cars. I like a lot of cars. I know you were talking about a Porsche 944. Why are you looking at a 944? What are you, uh, as my mom say, I know it's vintage. What are you putting a new motor in, muffler? You racing? You drifting?
All right. So my uncle had one when I was a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
he gave it to my other uncle, who gave it to me. I was gonna restore it, but it's a manual, and it just had so many problems with it. It just wasn't efficient, and
Mm-hmm.
so I decided to junk it. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna replace it with one that's. I mean, it was an automatic. I'm sorry, it was an
Mm-hmm.
automatic. So I'm gonna replace it with one that's a manual, and then I'm gonna get everything that he had, like the BBS rims, the
Mm-hmm.
maroon paint job, and just make sure that it looks exactly like. But it's also gonna be, like I said, a manual, and it's gonna be a turbo because his wasn't a turbo.
You gonna get the hat where you drop it down over your eyes so you can look like Jay-Z riding around. Sounds like another love song.
No, I think once I get it fixed up, I'm gonna give it back to my uncle.
Okay.
Like, I'm just gonna ride it, and then I'm gonna give it back to my uncle because the car I want, and I'm I'm doing my best not to buy it. I want an S63. That's what I
Okay.
want.
Okay. I
But
got you.
yeah,
All right. So, for me, I've been through a slew of cars now. Uh, probably I've had the Jaguar F Type R.
okay,
I I had two Porsches, a 911 Carrera 4S, all blacked out. And then I still have my 911 turbo.
Oh
It
man,
is it's convertible. I'm looking at another car now. Um, for me, um, I'm holding out for a GT3 RS. I'll eventually get there. I'm waiting for the prices to go down because everybody's selling cars 100,000 over when we're talking about Porsches. So
man.
I gotta kind of wait my turn because I don't want to go in that high. So I'm just waiting my turn on that. And then it's when you say the which year are you looking at for the S63?
Man, I would love to buy a brand new one, but if we're
Okay.
talking a brand new one, that's gonna be like a $200,000 car. But if I
Man,
get one,
I would honestly say get it like a year behind.
I was gonna do like a year to 3 years behind,
Only
no
because
more than 3 years.
they drop so quickly.
I
They
know,
drop
but
so quickly. So you do good by wait, just go a year or two behind and you still be good. Trust me, I go in between. I go between all the lots, so I know what they have
yeah,
up there. So I like the S63. S63 is nice.
yeah.
Gives you a nice little hum on it. It's got some get up on it. I
Hey,
like it.
it give you the back
I still
massage.
get it.
It give you that back
Yeah,
massage. I'm gonna go to
yeah.
sleep while I'm driving.
Man, let me tell you, I had the AMG G63 for a day. Man, I drove it. I mean, I went through loops and stuff like that. And I was like, man, I don't even like this. Just didn't like it. I had the Aston Martin for a day. I didn't like it. I
Yeah,
just, that I don't need that when I'm riding. I just need for you to go and be on your way. But I mean, I do like my cars. For a number of reasons. I won't mention the other ones that I do have. I just leave it at that. I
now,
just leave it at that.
when it comes to these exotic cars, are you buying brand new, or do you try and find them? That's
The F type I bought brand new.
okay.
Um, The Porsche, I did not buy that brand new. I set that back. But here's my thing: when I buy the car, it can't have more than like 3,000 miles on it for me.
I feel you.
Anything anything
Same.
else is you might as well just chuck it.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I like my cars with low miles. Um, because I want to put the miles on them. I tuned my 911. I'm in Florida, so I got a legal tent. so,
yeah. Hey, same.
I'm gonna black it out. Yep, I'm one of the ones that got to roll down the one of the backup.
Stick your head out the window light.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We clear.
Same here. You know, I wanted a Hellcat. Like I really wanted a Hellcat.
Yep.
But the problem is I drove 2015 S63 and I'm like, you know what? I'm not getting a Hellcat. I'm too old to get a Hellcat. And
Well, did you not like the pull off the line? Like, it depends on what kind of tires you got, slicks on them or not. It depends on how you pulling off on it. I mean, it's got some power, right? I had the Hellcat. I brought it home. They was like, "Yeah, you want to check it out?" And
yeah,
I was like, "Man," I was like, 804 horsepower on the red key. Me driving is great
yeah.
great straight line. But the dip in and out of lanes,
But that's the thing. Like that's the thing. If I got a Hellcat, I would drive it for about 6 months and then I'll sell it. Put
hmm
about 8,000 miles on it and sell it. But the
hmm
S63, I could drive that for the rest of my life.
you could drive it for 10 years. You could dip in and out of lanes on it.
Yeah,
And be
and
just fine. Just
it'd be
you
just
just gotta
fine.
keep up the maintenance on it. Make sure you get some tire and rim. protection there so you don't curb the tires.
Let me tell you a story. So I put. Let me tell you a story before we out of here. I got a Silverado, right? And you know my Silverado, I bought it brand new, paid it off, and you know a man need a truck, so I'm never getting rid of my Silverado. I put some rims on it, some wide body rims on it, and the day I got it, within an hour, I curved the back rim, the entire rim. I was going through a drive-through, and I just heard a grinding. I've never had rims this loud, and I hear this grinding, and I'm like, "What the heck is that grinding?" And then,
Ripping it up.
oh my god, I didn't even have these rims an hour, and I'm like, you know what? My wife was like, "Well, you gonna buy another one?" I'm like, you know what? I'm not buying them. This is life lesson. I'm not wasting $500 on these rims. I'm just gonna ride it out, and my rims now have character.
Oh yeah, you gotta get the tire rim. I've curved a couple of rims, but I go right on over there with my tire and rim. I'm like, rim person, please. And he come on through and he was like, you got another one? I got another one for you. Going to fix that. I'll be sitting right here. Thank you so much.
Man, me, I'm not wasting $500 on another rim for my truck. I'll put that towards something else. But you big time. Let me hold something.
I'm a broke college student trying to get in the game. I'm a broke college student trying to get in the game. But no, I like cars, but I like cars for different perspectives. I mean, I ain't had a Mini Cooper. I had a Countryman S. It was fully loaded. I was part of the Mini Cooper crew, riding around, pulling up, with the crew and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, that was fun. It was great. All right, I'm over it now. Let's get into something else. So yeah. So
That's what's up.
I had my fun.
Yeah, yeah. When I find this S63 with the right
I
year,
got I got one right now for you. And no guy. I got a guy right now that can get you an S63, no problem.
send me the info. Send me
All
the
right,
info. Bet, bet.
got you covered.
Hey, Tam, we got to do this in a couple weeks. We got to do this again.
Good. I'm ready. We can go into a deeper dive on where I see the industry is moving towards, what to look out for, what we need to do, and I talk about it on the weekends. If you don't catch Tech Stocks and Jobs or How We Linux on Saturdays at 11:30 for Tech Stocks and Jobs, where I talk about basically where we look at these IPOs, but what's their technology stack? Where are they going? Right? What are they doing with the technology? What do you need? What skill sets do you need to have? Can you get in on a pre-IPO? Looking at TechCrunch, looking at CNBC, just looking at these companies that are out there where you can get in on the ground floor, and be a part of the equity talk versus being after the equity talk, where you're doing system design, where you're changing that landscape, where you're becoming tech leaders in those companies versus the afterthought and looking to move up. Like we don't have enough tech leadership when it comes to black and brown. I'm looking to change that,
Me too.
as well as Howie Lennox just talks about where we at in tech. What do we see, what are we seeing, right? Where's Linux driving to, and where do we need our skill sets at, and how do you make your money in tech and then deploy that currency into other things such as real estate or investment funds, or maybe you fund start a school, maybe you train. I don't know. It's really on you how you see yourself, but just here are your options.
Right, right. Thank you for that. Thank you, Tam, for
You're welcome.
taking time today, dropping these jewels, sharing your knowledge, and for what you have been consistently doing, outside of this platform, but on your own platform and just in other people's lives.
Yep.
The streams that you mentioned on Saturdays, are they on your YouTube channel?
They're on my YouTube channel. Just like and subscribe, right?
All
Hit
day, all day.
subscribe. Hit the notification button so you can see when we go live. And I shout out to everybody who's in the chat who's been a part of Women in Linux. I thank you for your support. I thank everybody for their support tonight. I take this from D. I think she says, don't be roadkill on an informational highway. don't be roadkill in this tech industry, right? You know, uh, is that we want everybody, we need everybody, we need as many people as we can. Again, my minimum goal is 200K for everybody, and everybody knows that. Um, how can I help you get there? What do we need to do? It's going to take an all hands on approach, and it's going to take some time from you. It's going to take some tears. You might throw a book. I've thrown several.
Yeah.
Thrown several books. I've thrown computers. I've thrown a Cisco router. So, the frustration is real. I'm not going to lie to you, but once you settle down, get over it, take a walk, drink, get you something to drink, get some water, get a snack, get back at it, right?
Yeah.
And here's the other thing I want to add to: you are not in this alone. It's a community. The ones here, I'm here. Keep It Techie is here. Black Professor Ops, I see you out there. See you all. There are many of people in this industry. I don't understand why we choose to do things alone. Right? We don't have to. We don't have to do it alone. We already did it. I already did it. I already did it alone, so you don't have to do it alone.
Hey, the road I traveled was nothing but rocks and gravel. You know what I'm saying?
And some roadkill.
Real talk. Real talk. Hey, thanks everybody for tuning in. All of Tameika's information, contact information, resources are in the description of this video. Make sure that y'all go and show her much love and support. Follow her YouTube channel. Send her an email if you need to. And check out her live streams because, like I mentioned, on Sunday night, she's normally in this chat sharing information. She has her own platform, and I'm truly thankful for her, doing that and coming on today. Tameika, could you take us out today with some encouraging words and some just anything you want to say before we leave today?
Most definitely. The only access right now, or I should say barrier right now, is the fact that most may have not tried. So give it a shot. When we're looking at tech, don't just go after one thing. Dip your toe into everything and see what you like. That's the beauty about having all this information. And last but not least, if it's something you don't know, ask. Like hit people up on Twitter. I'm usually in my Slack group. I'm usually not on Twitter because it's easier for me to hop in and out of Slack channels or Slack groups. But I do answer on Twitter, but it's easier to hit me up on Slack. And then last but not least, the person that's sitting next to you, or the person that is in your group, share your knowledge with them, right? I think it's so important to share your knowledge. And don't, oh my God, this is my favorite one right here. Don't wait for somebody to tell you something and then you go try it. Just go try it. Don't wait for somebody, because their experience may not be your experience. You may see it totally different, but give it a shot. Like, okay, I thank you for your information. Let me go see what it is. Go in there and peek your head in. And if you don't like it, guess what? Don't do it.
Facts. Facts. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.